So I would just like to officially welcome all of you and thank you for joining us at Stockbridge Library, Museum, and Archives online poetry series. We are now in season 2, and season 2 has a focus on the refuge of witnessing and how witnessing themes show up in your poetry and relate to your work as a poet. So we are very lucky to have with us today Ellen Steinbaum. And Ellen is the author of 4 poetry collections. Her work has been twice nominated for the Pushcart Prize. And she's also an award-winning journalist and former Boston Globe columnist. Ellen has a blog she writes called Reading and Writing and the Occasional Recipe. And you can find that at her website, ellensteinbaum.com. And I will put that in the chat box for everyone. And before I turn the program over to you, Ellen, and to John Gillespie, I would just, John, like to thank you for your hard work for 2 years putting together a virtual poetry program that has amassed so much great support and readings from amazing poets from around the world. So thank you, John. Thank you, Ellen. And without further ado, I will turn it over to the 2 of you.
Yeah, Ellen, welcome. And we have to start off. We usually don't have this, but a greetings from an old high school mate in Chicago, Sue Boytz. So, there you go. You get the whole fan club here today.
Well,
Wendy, we're going to have to get a bigger Zoom screen. We're having too many people now. No, only kidding. Bad Zoom humor. So, Ellen, we start off every week, and listen, every week I ask myself the same question. I think sometimes I come up with different answers. Where do you find refuge right now for yourself?
Well, obviously, I was thinking about this ahead of today. And John, I thank you for inviting me back, and Wendy, and it's delightful to see all the faces in front of me and the names of those just off camera. Refuge right now feels like it divides into 2 possibilities, and it's personal and public. And I think personally, the refuge feels like, I guess for both, a place of safety, of comfort. And for me personally, when I think of the term refuge, it probably involves something like pillows and books. But in a more serious sense, after these past 2 years, it's a sense of safety, and underscoring that is a sense of impermanence, that we haven't had that feeling of being able to relax into the pillows and books and safety in quite the same way. And part of what has given me a sense of refuge is this kind of connection, even not being able to be in the same physical presence. We have ways to reach out across miles and be in the presence and face to face with people in a kind of intimate way. It feels to me like Zoom is kind of intimate. We can only speak one at a time, so we're all listening to whoever's talking, and we're all actually looking right at each other's faces, which allows us an intimacy that we might not have if we were in the same room.
So, this is another question, that's kind of evolved over, I don't know, I think we're in week 16 or something now of season 2. Do you see, it could be people on this call, do you see people, due to COVID, due to Ukraine, you could name 10 other things, inflation, gas. Do you see people, do you think, seeking more refuge? I mean, are they trying to find play, just anecdotally, you could just safely say, gee, all my friends are talking about, I need to get away somewhere and just, have a deeper chill out because shut out the world. I just don't know what's your sense of are people seeking more refuge or are they just trying to deal with whatever's going on?
Yeah, I think, I don't know whether we're looking for more. I guess we are, but I think we are more aware of of needing refuge or wanting or, seeking. I mean, it feels like we either have to or want to shut out aspects of the world. And so that's given us a sense that we need to kind of gather around ourselves what makes us feel safe and comfortable and peaceful.
Great. So do you have a couple poems that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start with things that were written right at the beginning of the whole shutdown. I want to preface this by saying that during the previous administration, I barely wrote a word. And as soon as the shutdown occurred, somehow I couldn't stop writing. And for a while, I was sort of keeping a tiny journal in poetry form, where every day I would have like a little quarantine poem. And it felt like something that I just couldn't hold back from, that I needed to do. And looking back at them now, what I'm struck by is the sense of impermanence, but also the change day to day, minute to minute. It felt like we were just feeling our way through it and trying to figure out where we were. Excuse me.
Yep.
So this is quarantine poem number 5. First, we were told we didn't need a mask, but now we're told we do. I followed the online instructions, made a mask without sewing with only a handkerchief and 2 hairbands. And even though I had no hairbands, I followed instructions, made them from rings cut from an unpaired sock. And I'm wondering if everybody else remembers that kind of moment where you could find instructions online of how to make a mask. And we were told that we should keep the masks for the medical personnel and the first responders. And so there was this moment of sort of wondering how to approach things. So this is quarantine poem 9. Last week, we walked with bare faces, smiled at passersby who seemed to fear that smiles can be contagious. Now we take walks wearing masks, greet others with small waves, but get back few waves in return from people on the street, determined to avoid the one remaining point of contact, as if they now fear looks could kill.
I love it.
Quarantine.
How many quarantine poems how many poems you think there are?
I don't actually know, but I realize, and it might have been a marker of the disorientation of the moment, that I have in front of me 2 poems that are marked quarantine poem 15.
Uh-oh, we have an identity crisis. Wendy, call the poetry police.
Well,
Great.
This one's 14, quarantine spring. Across the scented blossoms, the sprightly daffs and hyacinths, the trees festooned in pink and white and pale green blades of grass, a kind of grayness, though the air looks bright, a kind of muffling, almost color, almost birdsong. And this is the first of the 15s, when it was great. Everything is golden in flattened time. Photo album smiles sparkle. Remembered words are quieter somehow, and sun was always shining. Easy to love, even disasters are tamed with time.
Nice line.
And this is the other poem 15. When this is over, we say, as if the day will arrive when we will know, a day when we will open our front doors, take off our masks, and touch each other once again. Will we feel safe then? Forget this time as if it had never happened? Step over our dead on our way to stores and restaurants? And then the last of this group is, I don't know if other people, I think other people talked about having this kind of thing where during the shutdown, people had weird, crazy dreams. They were just, the waking moments were bizarre and the sleeping moments were bizarre. This is called Maybe Monsters. Maybe monsters, but more likely a long lost aunt, uncle, former neighbor, or the girl who sat behind you in third grade. This new parade of unexpected guests. And they do not disappear at dawn, but stay, pull up a chair, want coffee. They are tired of themselves, irritable, bewildered at being summoned here so often. Last night in Atlanta, and wearing shockingly high heels, I sat at a picnic table preparing for an interview for a job I was sure to get. And though I asked, no one could tell me company, interviewer, nature of job. I had to find my way to a city office building, careful not to catch my heels between boardwalk boards. While beside me, he was dreaming, he reported in the morning, that he was called upon to sort out who was and who was not essential. I want to see my grandmother. Keep asking her to come, but lovingly and with regret, she shakes her head, says, I was here for the 20th century, saw so much of it, so much. Wasn't that enough?
Absolutely. No, fantastic. I mean, those quarantine poems are, I think, very edgy and authentic for the moment. Yeah, I mean, we had poets last year that basically said it was too traumatic, they couldn't write. They just couldn't access the creative part of themselves. It was just too intense, too different.
Yeah.
So I applaud you for there's probably a couple more quarantine 15s laying around somewhere. We'll probably get to that later in the hour.
I may have pushed on to 16.
Okay, good. We're liking progress. We have to make progress as humans. Good. We're on to 16.
Yeah.
Ellen, we like to intersperse just some opportunity time for questions.
Okay.
Last year for those people on today is, we had the last 5 minutes of the program. Hey, I hope you have a question. We got to sign off now. So we like to have a couple of question breaks. If you had a question, you could put it in the chat. You could unmute yourself. We just like to have more audience interaction. If you'd like that. If I don't see anyone in a minute or so, we'll just move on.
Oh, I see a hand.
Where's the hand? I can't see it. I got to look at the
hand from
I think-
Susan Hawkins, whom I have not met. Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
It's nice to join you today.
Thank you.
I am not a poetry writer, but I did find during the pandemic a site called Haikus during the pandemic. And it inspired me to start thinking about haikuing. And it sort of helped me sleep at night to count on my fingers some of my thoughts as sleep was, difficult at times. So I appreciate you sharing your poems. It's lovely to hear them.
Thank you. That's a great idea, the haiku. I mean, maybe the ritual of counting, it's more creative than sheep. No offense to the sheep, but counting syllables is fascinating. Yeah.
Didn't hear, but it's something No offense to the sheep.
We have Mr. E.M. Mueller.
Yes, thank you. M. I'm Ellen. Did you say, I might have missed this. Are you still writing them every day? Were you writing them every,
No.
how long did that go on? And what stopped you? Do you know what stopped you? Just curious.
I have a feeling that it went on for probably a couple of months. I should mention, John, I should introduce you to M and to the rest of the group here. M is a very accomplished poet as well. I think that the daily observations were, I think they stopped when I got to the other part of, John, what your question around today is, which is the witnessing part. I think that our shutdown happened in late March, and by May, we were in the middle of another moment when we were witnessing things in the world that were pulling to me to write about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Em. I'm glad to see you here.
And Emma was good, or what Ellen said, you just reminded me, if you want to be on our mailing list, I put my address in the chat box. We only mail about poetry. You're not going to get a library solicitation or anything like that. So if you're interested, then Em or other poets, if you're interested in being at one of our events, just you can just put your name in the box or send me a note. So Michael, I know you had a hand up.
Oh, yeah, thanks, John. And I'm calling from the town of Ware, Massachusetts, and this is my second session, and I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. Ellen, I loved your poems, particularly the one about the monster and having lived the 20th century, and why want anything other than that. And to me, it's just with the parallels, the early, first couple decades of the 1900s and the first couple decades here, and just how similar in some ways we're seeing that. So that was very vivid, and I really appreciated that poem. And then just a quick comment about a refugee and the question earlier about perhaps seeking a deeper refugee at times. I've noticed, at least with high school students, where at least here they're not seeking that refuge any longer. They're just out and really kind of exposing themselves to everything and anything they can. Prom's coming up and everything they can push outdoors, which is good to see. So, but definitely appreciated your poems. Thank you.
Well, Michael, I'm heartened to hear that they're out there taking advantage of every minute, grabbing the day, and also engaging with the world and what the world has to offer and how they'd like to influence it. I certainly hope that, coming from an earlier activist generation, I certainly welcome that from this young generation.
Fantastic. So I'm not seeing anyone else, so I'm going to keep moving forward. So Ellen, would refuge, the concept of refuge, been in your poems pre-pandemic? I'm just wondering, sometimes poets kind of engage in different themes. I'm just wondering, was refuge or, self-nurture, whatever you want to call the expanded version of refuge, was that a theme that played out in your poetry?
I don't think so.
Okay.
First of all, I want to tell you that all the poems that I'm prepared to read today are poems that I wrote in the last 2 years.
Wow.
And I don't think that that type of refuge really was something I was thinking about. A number of years ago, somebody had asked me to write a little essay, and I've mentioned this before, other people on this call might have heard this, about why I write. And I think I was just writing without thinking of why exactly. And when I thought of the why, I realized that it was about the noticing. And I think that more than a sense of refuge, the idea of just noticing the time that goes by in our lives, not letting it go past us without our acknowledgement, our appreciation, our taking it in some conscious way. I think that was more a theme of my poetry. And also mortality. It seems stupid to say, I guess, but mortality. My first book was around my first husband's illness and death. And I think that mortality kind of hadn't occurred to me until that point in my life. And at that point, I became obsessed with it. So I think the mortality and the noticing were themes that interested me and engaged me rather than an idea of refuge.
You ever look back at the last, wait, go ahead, Em.
Well, I'm just thinking about how noticing things can be in itself a refuge. It sort of takes you out of yourself and you're just being the observer, and that sometimes can be a refuge.
That's lately I've found that noticing, or what we're talking about today, witnessing, has been almost the opposite of refuge. It's been something that maybe I feel I would like to seek refuge from.
Yeah, we should dive in. It's
okay.
Before we there was a question. I think you've been on a few sessions. I asked the question, do we reach a witnessing level, like it's the pot full and it's going to boil and flow over? It's like we can't witness anymore. We can't take it in. It's too traumatic, dramatic, instantaneous news. I'm just wondering what it's like maybe we can't witness anymore or witness at that level. So just kind of give me your thoughts on that.
I understand your point, and I think that's probably a very good one. I do find myself sometimes pulling back from the onslaught of news, and it also gets us to the word refuge used in a public way, because night after night for the past several weeks, we have been watching people seeking refuge, and we have been using in our conversation the word refugee in that public way, it makes us witness and demands that we witness, and yet I guess how we witness is it just to see this scene going past us of people carrying their belongings away from a place that's not safe and trying to find refuge? Or are we doing something? And if we are, is that in a way that's going to exhaust us emotionally, financially, spiritually, physically? Or is it a way that we can find a way to witness that sustains us and helps us sustain what we are witnessing and what we would like to help? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think, I find the reporting of witnessing, let's say the news, now there's this element, with the prior administration where don't confuse the story with the facts.
Yeah.
I read things and then I have to kind of decipher, is it is it true? Is it not true? Is it interpretation? You know, part of it is when we're witnessing, I think, through the written word of news, now I've got this filter, is I really don't know. I can't tell if I'm, you know, where's the truth lie? There's like a little thing, a meter or something, you know, that goes up and says, wait, oh, that one sounds pretty good. That sounds true, but yeah, too much. So there are some poems on witnessing that
There are, and I think witnessing, I mean, obviously, whether it started with this, certainly the most hugely dramatic episode that we had to witness publicly was the murder of George Floyd on camera in front of us. And the title of this poem is something I took from something someone said. We have no words. It is all we want to talk about. We have no words. It is all we want to talk about. We have no words. We have it all. It is all words. It is all no words. We have, we want, we have to talk. We want no words. We have words to talk about, to have all, to have no words to talk about. We have no, we all know all. We have words. We want to talk about it. It is all we want. It is all we have. We have want. We talk about want. We talk about no. It is all words. It is all talk. It is all we.
I love that.
Thank you.
I love that. I feel like on a merry-go-round of a vocabulary test. No, it's great. That was really, I felt like there was so many things going on there. It's great.
This one is very specifically about the George Floyd murder, the time it took. For the moment, ignore the subduing, the bringing to ground, and consider only this: what it feels like to hold the position on the unsteady surface for that long, twice as long as you would sit at your kitchen table waiting for French press coffee. Longer perhaps than lowered in a pew or behind or beside a hands folded, head bowed child, holding steady, never shifting weight from your one trembling knee, your one burning thigh, even as you feel the pulsing upward, desperately at first, then less. Consider how it would feel to continue pushing down, to feel the rumble of shouted words, then heavy quiet, while you continue bearing down. Imagine that you lay one steadying hand on ground beside you and feel stiffness in your legs as you arise from what might, in another circumstance, have been a pose of reverence.
Really nice. Really nice.
I mean, I think for all of us who witnessed that, the idea that a human being could take that action against another human being was, you know, just something that was important to witness, but hard to fathom.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to make sense out of it, really.
Exactly. John, one of the things I'm thinking about with witnessing too is how our society has become kind of divided around who witnesses and whose story is allowed to be told by whom, and whether we can cross these divisions to empathize and try to understand and try to witness a story that isn't ours. And I wrote this about, the epigraph is in memory of Seneca Village, which was a village that existed between 1825 and 1857, where Central Park is now, in a small part of what is now Central Park. Now that I know the story, I cannot get it out of my mind, but it is not my story. And I may not have the right to tell it, but I cannot not tell it, cannot, knowing now what I did not know, cannot stay as silent as the years since then have been, as the buried bones have been. I cannot stay silent now that I know, even though it is not my story, and they were not my people who lived together, not my people, but people, free men of property who could vote, who farmed, prayed, sent their children to the school until the city said the land, not yet, but someday, right in the middle, in the heart, not yet, but someday, ringed by tall buildings, was starting that day, too valuable for small people. And even though it is not my story, but it is a story of people, I will tell how the village was erased, the people blotted out, and how the large city tore up the farms, tore down the homes, the school, 3 churches where Irish, Black, and German sat together in the pews, now driven from the land they worked. And you can read about the land acquired from squatters who lived right there in the heart of the city on a few small, squalid farms. And even though it is not my story, it is people's story. And now that I know, I cannot stay silent, cannot get it out of my mind.
Very powerful. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's you're right. There is our own historical interpretation, in a way, as we're witnessing from afar, kind of from a time warp. And yeah, no, very nice, very nice. So let me ask you this about just for a second. Well, we have a chat box thing. It says, Ellen, how do you find the courage to write these poems?
How does one find the courage to look away? You know, how I mean, there are people who look away from this, and how can you find whatever it takes to just not engage with something that's in your world? It feels important to do, and so I feel kind of driven to it.
I find that your approach to these poems, to the George Floyd poems and to these, is a wonderful access point. The way you've approached it, it shows an incredible humanity and a willingness to look, which a lot of people like me don't want to do. So, and you found a way into these poems that are not your stories, but they're human stories, and you evoke that so beautifully. It really is wonderful, Ellen.
Thank you. The poet Patricia Smith, who I am fortunate to be able to call a friend, and whom I consider a mentor. I met her when I was just beginning to write poetry and just beginning to read my poetry in public. She's a Black woman, and she has a poem that's called Skinhead, in which it's a persona poem in which she adopts the persona of a right-wing skinhead and kind of tries to understand what could be in the head of a person whose worldview is so antithetical to her own and whose experience is apparently so antithetical and antagonistic to her own. So I think that kind of work has been kind of a guide to me.
So you share with us that you've been reading poetry for, that you've written during the last couple of years. Is all of that, in a recent book, or are you assembling another book?
I certainly, I think with a book, unless, well, one of the people who's on this call is Denny Bergman, who writes the most amazing books that are, they're collections of poetry, but they tell a story, each one. My first book sort of did, but since then, I haven't had that kind of story arc, a specific linear narrative arc in any of my books. But I think, as with short story writers, you keep working at it, you do one after another, and then you look at it and you say, oh, I think I got a book. So I'm kind of edging toward that moment. I'm hoping to be edging toward that moment. I've got kind of a group, so I'm hoping to corral them into some sort of sensible grouping.
Yeah, years ago, a friend's brother, many, many years ago, probably 40 years ago, I think 40 years ago, wrote Poems Against the War, which was against the Vietnam War, and all sorts of different contributors, but it was intense. The feeling, the magnitude of the feelings on certain issues. So let me ask you this, because I'm intrigued by your quarantine poems. So do you look back on the last one, the last quarantine poem you wrote? Do you ever go back to that? Because at some point after that, something changed.
Yeah, something changed. And I mean, well, I guess I would ask everybody who's here to go back and revisit the memories of that time. It was such a disorienting, disconnected at time that felt, we recognized as we were going through it how impermanent it was every minute. I mean, at first we put on our masks the minute we ventured outside our doors. And if we dared to go in, my husband and I were considered a little daring. I think that we did our own grocery shopping, but we came home and we put the grocery bags on the floor, and then we washed every single thing, even the boxes of oatmeal. And I mean, just, it was crazy.
I know.
The mail in the mailbox overnight, so all the molecules of other people touching our mail would kind of fly away or so. I don't know what we were thinking, but we didn't know. And so we were panicking around all the not knowing and trying to figure out rules for ourselves. And now looking back at it and how the rules changed, moment to moment and day to day. And now even we're looking at, we have the privilege of having had vaccination against the virus and boosters to add to the vaccinations. But now we're kind of in this moment of, is that enough? And are we going to need more? And are we going to need them every year, like flu shots? And I mean, everything, I guess the price of going through an unsettling experience like this is that we have to keep our minds open and we have to absorb the information as it comes to us from reliable sources as we get it and kind of figure out where we are. So, when I look back at the early quarantine poems, I get a sense of disorientation and kind of almost disbelief, like we lived that way.
Yeah, I remember going to the grocery store and there'd be a traffic jam of shopping carts with people wiping them down. So literally you couldn't walk into the store because there was all these carts and people and sanitizing stuff. And yeah, getting into the grocery store was an event.
And then more recently, the little bottleneck of traffic getting into some places, getting into a restaurant and showing your vaccination card or your, picture of it on your phone or whatever. And now we'll hear in Boston, you don't really have to show that anymore, and you can go out unmasked. So it's, it's another thing to get used to. And I think I'm a little hesitant to go out unmasked. First of all, as somebody said, will I look like a Republican? No offense, but I mean, will I look like an unmasked person, like a person who is a vaccine denier or whatever? But will I look like somebody who doesn't care, who's not vaccinated and who hasn't cared about the communal responsibility to keep one another safe? So we've got
What we call that is welcome to Maine.
yeah.
I think
yeah.
a third of Maine's unvaccinated. Yeah,
Huh.
no one talks about it. And even 6 months ago, you'd go into a grocery store and half the people would be unmasked.
Yeah.
And I've got to just be cautious. So it's just no, it's just amazing how this whole thing keeps iterating
Yeah.
and changing.
Well, summer will be outside.
That's
It'll-
it. That's it. That's right. So you have would you like to share some more poems with us?
I would. So this is called Summer 2021 Cicadas. And so another event that happened. And so that's last year. Those were my last cicadas, though who can be sure, of course, given my age and their infrequent outings, like scheduled comets and eclipses. They could be penultimate, but most likely my concluding swarm. Every 17 or 13 years they come, both prime numbers, though I think they have a mathematics of their own. Each one's 4 to 6 week life, the group's existence for 5 million years, how they arrived by trillions, harmless, loud, and food, high protein, low carb, gluten-free for anything that eats, with numbers as their sole survival plan. And despite the odds, after the years of quarantine, each one bursts back into the world with gusto and with all their hunger and not a moment's hesitation, unlike me. And that was a moment when we were being told, take off your masks, go outside, go, have fun. And I was thinking, I'm a little, yeah. So it was impressive to see the cicadas. They didn't seem to mind that they had been quarantined all that time.
They didn't get the COVID instructions.
Right. So I ended up in a very brief span of time, both writing about cicadas and about other insects. And I usually try to avoid writing and thinking about insects, but somehow 2 poems in the same month or so. This is called Commitment. The story I am finding charming is, would you believe, about cockroaches, pairs of them. An Asian, did I hear a shriek? An Asian species, Salganea taiwanensis, and even stranger, about their taste for each other. Yes, actually slight cannibalism. No, listen, it's not quite as disgusting as it sounds. The pairs are newly mated, moving into new homes where they will raise their babies, and they begin by taking turns chewing on each other's wings, eating them down to stubs, each lying quietly while the other feasts. And though, yes, I find the bugs disgusting and hope their new homes are not near mine, don't you too see it as an endearing way to start a life together, showing you will never fly away?
Wow.
And since I
Wow.
looked at my husband in one of these squares, I just thought that was a nice thing to somehow pledge your fidelity or pledge your undying presence forever by giving up your wings.
Wow. Amazing. Wow, amazing. So Ellen, I just want to take a couple minutes here just to ask again the audience if anyone has questions, because we're, approaching kind of the last 10 minutes. And I always want that, as I call it, don't let the poet off easy. Ask the big question. I don't think Ellen's sweating. Michael, come on, jam in on this. Don't let her run away. Make her tell us more. Only kidding. Little Thursday afternoon humor. So I'm not seeing anybody's hand or anything. So not seeing anything in the. I don't know. Should we ask Sue Boyce about some high school stories? I don't know. I don't know if that's a good. No, probably not.
I don't think so. I don't think I was that interesting in high school. We were good friends. Everything was just between good friends. So we wouldn't tell on each other. Right?
Yeah, oh, good.
I'm wondering, Ellen, you said you started writing later. What made you start? Or did you say that already and I missed it?
No, you didn't miss it. I've always written, and the way many people do, I wrote poetry as a child, but then let it go because I wrote prose most of my life. I did journalism. I wrote newspaper and magazine stories. I did a lot of
A wonderful play.
and a one-person play. Thank you. But at one point, I started thinking about wanting to say things that I felt I could really only say in poetry. And I didn't quite know how to express that. And the funny thing is, I bought a book called The Intimate Art of Writing Poetry by Riccio. And it was at the same time, because I bought the book because I sort of could look at a piece of prose and figure out how to edit it and rewrite it. And I didn't have that access to poetry. I didn't know how to look at what I had written and figure out how to make it better. So this book was really good. And it was at the same time that I was moving up to Boston from the New York area. And it turned out that Ricci, the author of that book, was teaching a poetry workshop 5 blocks away from where I moved. So it felt like it was meant to be. So I enrolled in his workshop and I learned a lot about writing poetry.
Great, fantastic.
So
So
shall I read
a few
another?
more poems to share.
I do. This one's called Wash, Dry, Put Away, Sweep.
Oh boy.
Thinking about it now, it makes no sense that dry didn't also put away, standing as she did, dish already in hand. But that would have taken one sister less, and there were 4. Sweep was the catch-all. Sweep, but also wrap leftovers, clear the table of salt and pepper shakers, an occasional trivet, generally tidy up. Make sure nothing went undone. It was always the 4, always the girls, no matter what their ages.
Yeah. Okay. I'm in
And
the living room.
And though I was their cherished pet, I felt my lone, sisterless state. Wash was the job I coveted. Wrote to ask hot, soapy water, gossip, laughing, maybe secrets in the air around me. But I was hurried to the living room with my grandmother. She to rest from cooking, I to wait till I was older, though older would also be sisterless. On a plague-abbreviated holiday, family paired to bare bones, no cousins, aunts, or random friends. My 3 daughters and granddaughter take up the task. this generation's necessary for wash, dry, put away, sweep. And this is called What the Skin Hungers For. And I guess in terms of the next level of quarantine poems, this would be toward the end of that kind of quarantine moment. What the skin hungers for. The heartfelt handshake, yes, or hug, of course, but maybe even more, what would have passed unnoticed then? The slight encountering of edges as we leaned into one another on subway seats, enlarged in winter by layers of sweaters, coats, and through our clothes, the stranger's arm was simple presence only, hardly felt. The way in narrow theater seats, a sleeve to sleeve, or even briefest brush of flesh to flesh occurred below the level of intrusion, leaving now only a vague, insistent drone, the aching touch of what is absent.
More.
Well, I've only got 2 more left, so.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, it's,
Okay.
well, that's 2 is fine.
This one is called Have We Forgotten? And it is a golden shovel poem. And for those of you who may not be familiar with this, it is a form invented by the poet Terence Hayes that uses lines most often from poems by Gwendolyn Brooks. This was a homage to Gwendolyn Brooks. Uses the lines from a poem as the end lines of a new poem. And this is called Have We Forgotten? Have we forgotten that we inhabit this world together, are breathing the same air, are each occupying the inches of others' spaces, and must reap our harvest together? We know we are tillers of the same earth, each walking the rows, each other's tools in our hands, our business the same, our work, what we must do together if we are to survive. We examine each offered gift, ours and others, humbled by the magnitude of what is before us and must be our mutual bond. The lines from Gwendolyn Brooks are, we are each other's harvest, are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond.
Very nice.
And shall I just conclude with my last poem?
Absolutely.
This is called What Happiness Is. The back of the jacket on the woman ahead of me in the supermarket line says Dropkick Murphys, the band that opened for the one his son played percussion for. So I get out a pen, jot down a reminder to take home, the way he sometimes sends me an email from 2 rooms away with a story someone told in his Zoom class or something remarkable he read. Each of us polishing our meager presence the way a cat might leave a limp gift on a pillow.
Very nice.
Thank you. That was, there's a wonderful book by Aminata Forna that I love called Happiness. And the idea from that comes out of that book, which is how our connection to one another is sort of enhanced or underscored by what the life experiences that we kind of tuck away to share later with one another.
That's great. I also like your emailing from the other roomers. You know, it's amazing. You know, years ago you had to get up and actually talk to somebody, but
Exactly. Now we'll sit here in our fuzzy slippers. Anne, was that a question?
Yeah.
Or? Yeah.
Well, a comment and a question. First of all, Ellen, thank you for this beautiful reading. And I love
let me introduce you to Anne Bookman, who is a wonderful poet who has a brand new book out. Maybe you'll
Oh,
talk to her too.
Thank you. So I love this homage to Gwendolyn Brooks. And it reminds me of one of my favorite lines of yours, which I'm probably going to misquote, but it's something like, all we have in common is that we lead the same lives, which I've always just thought was brilliant. And you've taken it to a new level, I think, with that second to last poem. So thank you. I wanted to just, my question is just to go back to the George Floyd poem, which I just found amazing. I don't think that I've really, I read a lot of poems about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so on and so forth. I don't think I've ever read a poem yet where the poet is inhabiting the perpetrator, the murderer, what can I say, Derek Chauvin. You know, and I thought that was so daring and so well done and so hard to do. And I'm just wanted to ask you, did you think about being George Floyd, or did you go immediately to trying to be Derek Chauvin?
I didn't think about being George Floyd. I think I couldn't have imagined that. But I think what I couldn't get over was, how could someone be Derek Chauvin? And I think, you know, I think you can understand that too, that, I mean, how does one feel that this is something you can do, that you have a right to do it, that he seemed to feel he had a duty to do it? I mean, it boggles the mind. You know, how can you dare do it? So
I think in this moment where the country is so divided and we're just so divided about everything, that to just even try to imagine the unimaginable is an act of witnessing that is very courageous. So thank you.
thank you.
and with that, I think we have to sign off, or our Zoom recording will turn to dust.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Wendy.
Ellen,
and
oh, Ellen, thank you again. Absolutely fantastic. And people are saying, lovely to spend the time with you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Ellen. Marvelous. Thank you so much. So you're getting a lot of applause here, a lot of word
Yes.
applause on the all right. We got real applause. All right, good. All right.
Thank
Listen,
you, Ellen.
thank you, everyone.
John.
And we'll
Wonderful,
hopefully
Ellen.
see you next week.